I never expected that the love I had nurtured for nearly 70 years of my life for my family and children would be exchanged for my son letting me sleep in the garage, among the gardening tools and old, cold, and messy paint cans. Shocked and angry, I was still calm enough to hold the house ownership papers tightly and make a decision that left him unable to react. If you find my story interesting and want to see the next part of this story, please subscribe and follow the channel because we will continue to give you special things tomorrow. You will wonder why a 70-year-old mother was kicked out of the garage of her house by her own son. I spent several hours reflecting on what I did for my son. True love is built over time. It's a journey shaped by years of devotion, understanding, and sacrifice. But heartbreak, humiliation, and the final act of betrayal can strike in an instant, leaving behind a wound that lasts far longer than the moment itself. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and after my husband George Whitmore passed away, I was forced to become the breadwinner for our 3 children. I don't regret raising them, not the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the dreams I quietly buried so they could pursue theirs. I gave them everything I had, every part of me, without hesitation. But if I'm being honest, what hurts me is realizing that in the process of pouring myself into their lives, I forgot to pour anything into my own. I raised them with love, patience, and hope, but somewhere along the way, I forgot to take care of the self I was supposed to be. George Whitmore and I bought our little house on Maple Ridge Lane when I was 28. It wasn't much, just a modest 2-story house with chipped white shutters and a yard that had never been tamed, but it was ours. He was a history teacher, and I was a school librarian. We didn't have the money to travel to Europe or buy a new car, but we had each other, we had laughter, and we had dreams. That house had seen it all. Andrew Whitmore's first bike ride, he fell off 3 times and insisted on trying again. Rachel Whitmore's first heartbreak, her mascara streaking my favorite pillow. Matthew's mud pies, yes, real mud, proudly served on my beautiful china plate. I hold on to every detail like scripture. When George Whitmore died, a heart attack, sudden and devastating, one December morning, my world turned upside down. He collapsed in the kitchen. I remember the sound of his coffee cup shattering on the tiles, a sound so final that it sometimes echoes in my mind when I make tea. They told me I was strong. Ruth, you were amazing, holding it together. What they didn't see was that I folded the laundry with shaking hands, just so the kids wouldn't notice the tear stains on their clothes. Or I lay awake at night, hugging George Whitmore's pillow as if it could still breathe next to me. But I did what mothers do. I swallowed my pain like a bitter pill and stuffed my sorrow into the corners of the house. I turned on the lights, cooked a hot dinner, and kept my voice even. I didn't date, I didn't dream, I didn't dare ask myself what I wanted, because I had 3 little beings who needed me completely. Every Christmas, I baked the same sugar cookies with red and green sprinkles. Every birthday, I made handmade banners and cards with names. And every Sunday I cooked dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon. It didn't matter if only 1 child came, or none. I still set the table for 5. That house became a sanctuary. It became an altar where I worshipped my devotion. I dust every frame like a prayer. I keep it clean, not for myself, but for them. So they always have a reason to come home. But everything I had cherished, nurtured, and carefully preserved seemed to vanish into nothing when my son left a garage key on the kitchen table and said, "Just think about it, Mom," as if he were giving me a gift. But that night, I didn't cry or scream in pain. I just sat on the porch, wrapped in George Whitmore's old fleece blanket, listening to the wind whisper through the trees we had planted together. I thought about all the birthday candles I had lit, the skinned knees I had bandaged for my son, and the long nights I had stayed up nursing him through fevers. And now, in return, I was being pushed to sleep in the garage, among insulation rolls and bare drywall, as if it were some act of charity. I looked at that key with a sense of coldness, shame, and heartbreak. There were no fights, just quiet dismissals wrapped in polite phrases from my children like, "We didn't want to bother you," or, "Oh, I thought you already knew," and that's how they treated me. Andrew Whitmore and Melissa Whitmore didn't push me out with cruelty. They did it with something far more chilling, with cold politeness masked by busy schedules and Melissa Whitmore's family priorities. And they pushed me out inch by inch with manners that never once raised a voice. After the wedding, I wasn't invited to. I was slowly cut out of Andrew Whitmore's world, and I tried to stay close in the only ways I knew how. I delivered homemade meals, lasagna, chicken stew, banana bread, still warm from the oven, and I left them on the front porch, thinking about Melissa's long work days and hoping my food would soften her heart, and I sent them a calendar marked in blue ink with every family member's birthday, and I crocheted a little bunny for Emma with floppy ears and a pink bow, and still, I never received a thank you. But I kept trying. When Emma turned 1, I bought her a pale blue dress with lace trim, and I remember standing in the local store for nearly 20 minutes, holding up 2 different ribbons and trying to decide which one looked softer, and I tied the bow myself, adding a small note that read, "From Grandma Ruth, with love." Then I waited for the invitation, and it never came. A few days later, I saw the photos Melissa Whitmore had posted on Instagram: balloons, a dessert table, matching outfits, perfect lighting, and Melissa's mother appeared in almost every frame, holding Emma like she was the queen of the event, while I wasn't even in the background because I wasn't there, because I hadn't been invited. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand, the dress still in its box beside me, and I stared at the screen, trying to feel something different from what I actually felt, which was erased, quietly, completely erased, like someone had taken the back of a pencil and rubbed me off the page. So I called Andrew Whitmore. He answered casually, like nothing had happened. "Oh, we meant to tell you. It was just a small thing. Melissa Whitmore's family mostly. Nothing formal." I tried to keep my voice steady. "But I'm her grandmother." There was a pause. Then he said, almost kindly, "You are." "Of course you are. We just thought, well, with your knees and the drive, we didn't want to burden you." Burden. That word echoed in my chest like a siren. I wasn't Emma's grandmother. I was a burden. That's what I had become in his eyes. And after that moment, everything came faster, like dominoes falling, one boundary after another. Andrew Whitmore suggested bringing over a real estate agent. "Just for evaluation," he said. "You don't have to make any decisions. It's just smart planning." Melissa Whitmore had connections, he said. "They could help me find a lovely place in Hillcrest, a senior community, safe, quiet, dignified." He said it like he was offering me a retirement gift. I said no. He didn't take it well. A week later, I came home from the grocery store and found a business card tucked in my doorframe. A local realtor. Her name scrawled in pen across the back. "Excited to meet you." My stomach dropped. I called Andrew Whitmore, my hands trembling. He admitted it casually. Yes, they'd had someone come by the house, just to look around, just unofficially. "You had a stranger walk through my home without asking me?" I asked, my voice cracking. He sighed like I was overreacting. "Mom, come on. You've had a good run in that place, but it's time. That house is falling apart. Emma needs a real yard, a place to grow." I took a breath, shaking. "She doesn't visit," I whispered. That stopped him. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the truth to settle in. And then, like a knife in slow motion, he said the words I'll never forget. "Maybe you should just move into the garage, if you're so attached to that place." The garage? The room where George Whitmore once fixed bicycles and stored holiday decorations? No windows? No heat? No space for memory? Just a box. That's where he thought I belonged. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I didn't say a word. I hung up, and I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the heart of my home, and looked around. At the wall of family photos I'd dusted every week, at the dent in the floor where Andrew Whitmore once dropped a full box of Legos, at the oven that had baked every birthday cake, and I realized something so painful, it stole the breath right out of my lungs. I had spent my entire life building a home for people who now wanted to gut it. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a fixture, a worn-out chair, a loose tile, something outdated and inconvenient, and somehow being forgotten hurt more than being hated, because hate still recognizes you exist. Being forgotten, that's like becoming invisible while still breathing. I sank to the floor and cried, not because I didn't love them, but because I loved them so much it had blinded me. I let them whittle me down piece by piece, all while thinking I was being strong, being selfless, being what a good mother should be. But in that moment, I knew something for certain. If they couldn't see the value in who I was, I had to stop waiting for them to give me permission to matter. It arrived without a sound. No knock at the door, no phone call, just a quiet envelope slipped through the mail slot, landing on the hardwood floor with the softest whisper, barely a presence, and yet somehow it echoed through the whole house like a warning. There was no card, no note, no instructions. Just my name, scribbled in Andrew Whitmore's rushed handwriting across a padded envelope, and inside, something small, metallic, and unfeeling. A key. A single, cold key. Not to the front door of my house, not to a safe deposit box, or a precious memory locked away. Just a plain key. Dull silver. No tag. No explanation. But I knew what it was. The garage. The same garage Andrew Whitmore had so generously suggested I move into. As if it were a gift. As if offering me a glorified storage closet was some act of compassion. I stood in my kitchen, holding that key in my palm like it might suddenly burn me. My heart rose and fell beneath my sweater in a strange rhythm, too slow to be rage, too heavy to be grief. It wasn't sadness. Not quite. It wasn't fury. Not exactly. What I felt was something deeper, older, sharper, recognition. This was who I had become to them. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not even a person, really. I was clutter, excess, an aging keepsake too sentimental to throw away, but far too inconvenient to keep out in the open. That evening, I walked into the garage. I hadn't been out there since George Whitmore passed. The air was still dry and stale, full of dust and forgotten things. His old fishing rod leaned in the corner, exactly where he'd left it. A pair of work gloves sat folded on a shelf, stiff with time. There was a lawn chair, some old paint cans, a tangle of extension cords that hadn't been touched in years. It was cold, lifeless, not a place for living, but maybe that was the point. Maybe Andrew Whitmore never expected me to actually live in it. Maybe he just needed to feel like he'd offered something, a checkbox, an alibi, something to soothe whatever guilt flickered behind his eyes when he looked at me. I stood there in the silence, surrounded by spiderwebs and shadows, and I saw it clearly for the first time. They didn't want me to live. They wanted me contained, tucked away, stored, available but not present, decorative but not essential. That realization didn't break me. It clarified me. I walked back inside, set the key on the kitchen counter, and stared at the space where the fruit bowl used to sit. It was gone now. I'd moved it last week, but the shape of it remained, like a ghost imprint, a memory of something once nourishing. I picked up a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I asked myself the question I had buried for decades beneath duty, casseroles, and silent tears. If no one else's needs mattered, what would I want? The answer didn't come right away. In fact, it scared me how long it took. I sat there, staring at the blank page, afraid of what it might reveal. For so long, my identity had been wrapped in everyone else's needs, Andrew Whitmore's allergies, Rachel Whitmore's science fairs, Matthew's night terrors. Yet what I wanted had always come last, if it ever came at all. But slowly, like a sunrise after a long storm, the answer rose. I wanted freedom, not the kind sold in advertisements, not the kind found in slogans. Real freedom, the kind that lets you fall asleep without resentment hardening in your chest, the kind that doesn't ask you to shrink so someone else can shine, the kind that says, you matter, even if no one notices. I picked up the phone, not to call Andrew Whitmore, to call a local real estate agent, one I found online, not one Andrew Whitmore or Melissa Whitmore recommended. Her name was Ashley, young, bright eyes, a voice like warm sunlight. When I told her I was thinking of selling my house, she paused. Are you sure? She asked gently. Yes, I said, but not to just anyone. I wanted to go to someone who needs it the way I once did. Within days, the Mendozas walked through the door. Grace and Elijah, newlyweds, both teachers, not a hint of entitlement in their voices. Grace ran her fingers along the banister and teared up when she saw the dining room. Elijah stood by the fireplace and said, It feels like a home already. I sold it to them for less than market value. Not out of pity, out of purpose. Because I wanted this house, the place that had once held all my love, to become someone else's beginning, not a pawn in Andrew Whitmore's remodeling plans. A few days later, Andrew Whitmore called. "Let me guess. You're moving into Hillcrest?" His voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "No," I said. "I'm moving to Arizona." Silence. "Oh, Arizona. There's a literary center there. I've started writing." He laughed. "Writing?" "Yes. Turns out I have a lot to say." He didn't know how to respond. I could hear the gears turning. For the first time, I had made a decision that didn't orbit his comfort. "What are you going to do there?" I didn't hesitate. "Live," I said. "Really live?" After we hung up, I packed my bags. Not with shame, not with sadness, but with trembling hands filled with anticipation. I wasn't running away. I was leaving. And there's a difference. One is rooted in fear, the other in power. Before I walked out the front door for the last time, I picked up the garage key from the counter and taped it to a folded piece of paper. Then I slipped it into an envelope and mailed it. No return address. On the note I had written, "You once gave me this key to push me out. I'm giving it back to open your eyes. I am not the garage. I am the foundation, and I am done being forgotten." And then I boarded a plane. Just me, a carry-on bag, and a notebook full of unwritten pages. Arizona was dry, brutally honest in its heat and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't try to fill awkward space with noise. The kind that stares you straight in the eye and dares you to be uncomfortable. And after years of polite rejections, half-hearted thank yous, and being slowly pushed into the background of my own life, that kind of honesty felt like a strange kind of relief. There was no pretending here. No one asked where I used to live. No one asked why I moved or who I left behind. The desert didn't need explanations. It just waited, quietly, patiently, for me to show up. I had rented a small adobe bungalow, 2 bedrooms, though I only needed one, and a narrow patio just big enough for a folding chair and 3 mismatched flower pots. There were hairline cracks in the tile, a ceiling fan that ticked when it turned, and a front door that stuck when the sun baked the frame. But when I opened that door each morning, sweat on my brow and light spilling across the floor, I whispered to myself, "It's mine." And no one rolled their eyes when I said so. I arrived in Arizona with only what I could carry in a single rolling suitcase: a few books, a faded photo of George Whitmore tucked in the front sleeve, my glasses, a small bag of yarn, and a spiral-bound notebook I bought at the airport gift shop for $3.99. On the cover, I wrote 3 words in permanent marker: "Start from here." And I did. The first few mornings, I woke before dawn, not because someone else needed me, but because I wanted to see the sunrise. I'd brew chamomile tea, wrap myself in a thin blanket, and sit on the porch watching the light crawl across the dusty earth, turning cacti and tumbleweeds into shadows that stretched like long-forgotten stories. It was the first time in years that I felt like I was watching my own life unfold, without having to play supporting actress in someone else's. The literary center was 10 blocks away, a squat little building tucked between a bakery that always smelled like honey and a thrift shop filled with everything from cowboy boots to glass angels with missing wings. And when I stepped inside, the air smelled like old paper and lavender. I felt safe. A woman named Carmen greeted me. She had silver hair twisted into a loose bun, turquoise rings on every finger, and a voice like warm whiskey, rough and smooth all at once. "You must be Ruth," she said, her eyes kind. "Ashley told me you're a writer." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in weeks. "I've never written anything in my life," I said, "unless you count grocery lists and notes in lunchboxes." She tilted her head, smiling. "Then you've written a saga, honey. You just haven't put it on paper yet." She handed me a flyer for a writing workshop. Writing, The Life You Weren't Allowed to Tell. I signed up before I could talk myself out of it. That first session, I sat in a circle with women who had lived 100 lives between them. A nurse who had lost her license because she stayed at her dying partner's bedside instead of her shift. A grandmother who hadn't spoken to her son in 11 years. A woman who once played piano in a traveling orchestra but gave it up because her husband told her, "Music doesn't pay bills." We cried. We laughed in places we didn't expect to. We listened without fixing. We nodded without judgment, and slowly, I began to write. Not because someone asked me to, not to get published, just to remember. I wrote about the scent of George Whitmore's shirts after work, half cologne, half chalk dust. I wrote about Andrew Whitmore's night terrors and how I used to hum lullabies until he calmed. I wrote about the way I once caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back, not because she had aged, but because she looked emptied. I wrote about the scent of George Whitmore's shirts after work, half cologne, half chalk dust. I wrote about Andrew Whitmore's night terrors and how I used to hum lullabies until he calmed. I wrote about the way I once caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back, not because she had aged, but because she looked emptied. I wrote about the garage key. At first, just holding the pen over those words made my fingers shake. The key, cold and metallic, had become my final scar, a symbol of quiet betrayal from the boy I raised to be better. But every time I wrote about it, the shape of that memory changed. It stopped being a weapon. It became a hinge, a threshold, a door I chose to walk through. I started walking again every evening after dinner, just me, the cicadas, and the scent of sunburned earth. I learned the names of desert flowers, globe mallow, fairy duster, desert marigold, plants that shouldn't thrive, but do. They bloom in places where nothing's supposed to live. They survive by becoming part of the wind instead of resisting it. Just like me. One Saturday morning at the farmer's market, I bumped into a man named Henry. He wore a straw hat and played jazz guitar in a folding chair under an olive tree. He sold jars of homemade jam and grew pomegranates in his backyard. We talked. He asked why I moved here. I told him, I'm starting over. He smiled. You're not starting over. You're finally starting. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in years. He invited me to a community potluck. I brought my apple cobbler. No one asked if I was married. No one asked where my children were. They asked if I had enough to eat, and they meant it literally. That night, I lay in bed under a thrifted quilt and opened my notebook. But I didn't write about the past. I wrote about the future, about older women learning to swim, learning to love themselves, learning to say no without apology. I wrote about loneliness not as a tragedy, but as a quiet teacher, the kind that waits at your door, patient and silent, until you're ready to let it in and ask what it came to show you. Carmen read one of my essays. You should publish this, she said. I blinked. Me? Who wants to read about an old woman and her garage key? She smiled. Everyone who's ever been told their best years are behind them. That night, I wrote a new page. The desert didn't save me. It reminded me I didn't need saving. I just needed space to remember who I was before I was needed. And for the first time in decades, I didn't fall asleep wondering who I was to someone else. I fell asleep knowing who I was. To me. When I first arrived in Arizona, I didn't think I'd stay long enough to unpack, let alone plant anything. It was meant to be temporary. A pause, a quiet exhale after decades of holding my breath. But silence, I've learned, does strange things to the heart. At first, it feels empty, too wide, too still. But give it time, and it starts to bloom with possibility. After so many years of being crowded out by noise, by obligations, expectations, and roles I never asked for, the quiet felt like an open field, and something in me, long buried, reached toward it. It started with one potted rosemary bush I picked up from the Sunday market. I set it on the porch table next to my tea mug, not expecting much, but each morning I found myself greeting it, checking its leaves, brushing my fingers along the stems just to inhale their sharp, earthy scent. Next came a clay planter of marigolds, gifted by a neighbor who said they'd bring the sun closer. Then 3 mismatched ceramic pots I found at the thrift store for $2 each, one chipped, one painted with faded stars, one plain as unspoken grief. I didn't know what I was doing. I filled them with soil that spilled too easily. I scattered seeds, whose names I didn't know and whose instructions I forgot to read. Still, I watered them gently each morning, as if apologizing for all the times I forgot to tend to myself. I called it my garden. It wasn't grand. No rows, no beds, Just a few pots lined up on a patch of porch no bigger than a kitchen rug, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, a reason to stay put. I spoke to those plants the way I once spoke to my children, soft, reassuring, loving even in disappointment. "Grow if you want to," I'd whisper. "I'll be right here either way." At first, nothing happened, but eventually, quietly, little green shoots broke through the cracked earth, and watching them grow, I realized something in me was breaking through too. I was anchoring, not to a house, not to a role, not to someone else's definition of me, but to myself. I began spending more time at the literary center. Carmen asked if I'd help with the memoir workshops. Before I knew it, I was co-leading sessions, me, a woman who hadn't written a full sentence in years. The stories that came through those doors were like rivers cutting through stone. A retired teacher who was disowned by her son for marrying again at 70. A woman who had never been touched gently, not once in her 68 years. A widow who finally admitted she'd stayed married because she didn't know who she was without the title of wife. They poured their lives onto paper, and I listened. I held space. I shared too. I told them about the garage key. The first time I said it aloud, he told me to sleep in the garage. I felt something inside me twist, but each time I told the story, the pain softened, not because it stopped mattering, but because it stopped defining me. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. There was a package on my doorstep, small, brown, no frills, but the handwriting on the label made my breath catch. Andrew Whitmore. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The Arizona sun warmed the paper, but the space between my ribs felt cold. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I brewed a glass of iced tea, added a sprig of rosemary, and sat on the porch, waiting for the sky to turn that familiar pink that George Whitmore used to say made everything look like a memory. He called it the hour truth felt safe. Only when the light turned soft and forgiving did I cut the tape. Inside was a snow globe, handmade, slightly lopsided. A tiny clay house sat nestled inside, complete with a roof and chimney and tiny window boxes. The snow, more glitter than flake, danced around it in slow swirls when I shook it gently. And on the base, written in a child's uneven scrawl, to Grandma Ruth, a house full of love. I blinked. My vision blurred. Tucked beneath it was a folded note, written in Andrew Whitmore's hand. "Emma made this with Melissa Whitmore's help. She asks about you all the time. I told her stories about the rosemary, the garden, your writing. She wanted you to have this." I know what I said. I know what I did. And I know what it meant. If you'll let me, I'd like to come see you. No real estate, no talk of downsizing. Just me, your son. I read it once, then twice, and still I didn't know how I felt. Not relief, not joy, not forgiveness. Something slower, warier, like opening a window that's been stuck for too long. I carried the snow globe outside and placed it on the table next to my rosemary. I sat beside it for a long time, listening to the wind thread its way through the marigolds and the hum of the desert's quiet strength. The little clay house inside the globe glowed as the sun dipped low, glitter swirling around it like dreams being shaken loose. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "I don't know if this is the beginning of healing or just the echo of what was lost, but for the first time, I'm not afraid to open the door." So I wrote back, not a letter, not a speech, just one line. "One cup of coffee, one clean slate, I'll be on the porch." And I left the envelope by the mailbox, sealed with rosemary. The day Andrew Whitmore arrived, the air smelled like rain. Arizona doesn't rain often, but when it does, it arrives like a memory you didn't know you still carried, bold, sudden, impossible to ignore. It doesn't ask for permission, it just comes. I stood on my porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee, watching storm clouds gather over the low desert hills. My hands didn't tremble. My knees didn't wobble. I wasn't afraid, not of the rain, not of the past, not even of the man pulling into my driveway. Andrew Whitmore stepped out of the rental car slowly, one hand gripping a worn backpack, the other shielding his eyes from the sun. And in his face, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, not in holidays or rushed phone calls or awkward video chats. Humility. His voice was quiet but clear. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Andrew Whitmore," I said, offering him a mug. "Still take it black?" He gave a small smile. "Still bitter." We chuckled. A short, unsure sound. But it was real. We sat on the porch together, side by side, but slightly angled, the way people sit when they're not quite ready to face everything head on. My small garden stretched in front of us, green and defiant. The rosemary had nearly burst out of its pot. The marigolds bent slightly in the breeze. A hummingbird hovered near the lavender, darting so quickly it barely seemed real. We sipped in silence. The sky rumbled in the distance. After a while, Andrew Whitmore spoke. "I didn't know how far gone I was," he said, "until Emma asked me why you weren't at her birthday." I stayed quiet. He swallowed. "I didn't have an answer that didn't make me sound like a stranger to myself." He set his coffee down. "I didn't see what I was doing to you. I thought I was being responsible. Melissa Whitmore and I, we like plans. We like predictability. And somewhere in that, I stopped seeing you as a person. You became a checkbox, a worry to be managed." He turned toward me. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear this from me. I was wrong." I studied his face, the lines around his mouth, the gray beginning to touch his temples. I searched for the boy I raised, the one who built Lego towers on the living room rug, the one who cried when his first goldfish died, the one who once crawled into bed beside me after a nightmare and whispered, "You're my safe place." And I found him, buried under years of pride and distance, but still there. "I don't hate you, Andrew Whitmore," I said quietly, "but I won't be erased, not even by my own son." He nodded, eyes wet. "I know." We let the silence settle again. This time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Later that afternoon, I took him to the literary center. I showed him the reading room, my small office, the corkboard where we hung writing samples like they were holy. He ran his fingers over the typed pages, reading snippets from women he'd never met, but who had become pieces of my second life. When he reached a passage I had written about the garage key and what it had come to symbolize, he didn't look away. "That hurt," he said, voice low, "but I think I needed it to." That evening, he helped me trim the lavender and patch the step that had started to wobble near the porch stairs. We didn't talk much, but when we did, the questions felt different. Not surface level. "What are you writing next?" "Do you like it here?" "Have you thought about teaching?" Small questions maybe, but real ones. For the first time in years, Andrew Whitmore wasn't checking in on me. He was trying to know me again. He stayed for 2 days. We took a walk through the market on Saturday morning. He asked about the flowers in my pots, tried prickly pear for the first time, and chuckled when he nearly choked on the seeds. On Sunday afternoon, just before he left, he handed me a package wrapped in brown paper and string. "I wanted to give this to you in person," he said. "I found them in a box in the attic. Figured they belonged to you more than anyone." Inside were copies of George Whitmore's old journals, scanned, printed, bound with soft blue covers. My breath caught. "I read them," Andrew Whitmore said. "Every word. He loved you so much, Mom, and I think I finally get why you stayed in that house for so long. You weren't stuck. You were honoring something." He paused. "I want Emma to know that part of you, the full story, not just the one I told." I didn't cry when he left, not because it didn't move me, but because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel left behind. I felt respected. That night, I sat at my desk with one of George Whitmore's journals on my lap. I lit a candle, opened to a random page, and began to read. The ink had faded in places, but George Whitmore's voice was still strong. If she ever forgets who she is, I hope the world reminds her. But if it doesn't, I hope she reminds herself. I closed the book and held it to my chest, breathing in the scent of paper and memory. "I have," I whispered. Then I opened my own journal, turned to a blank page, and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't a favor we give. It's a freedom we choose, and today, I chose mine." It started with dirt under her fingernails. Emma, in her pink sandals and polka dot sun hat, was kneeling in my little porch garden like she belonged there, like she'd always belonged there. Her knees were smudge brown, her curls wild from the wind, and her tiny fingers patted down the soil with more care than most grown men show their own homes. Every scoop, every press of her palm was deliberate, reverent. "This one's for the bees, Grandma," she announced, pointing proudly to a seedling she had just tucked into the ground. I crouched beside her. "And this one?" She looked up at me, squinting against the sun, her expression pure and matter-of-fact. "That one's for you, so you don't feel lonely when I go home." I blinked. The heat prickled my eyes, but it wasn't the sun that made me ache. Andrew Whitmore and Melissa Whitmore had driven down for the weekend from their new place, just 40 minutes outside town, close enough to visit often, far enough for it to be a choice. And this time, it had been Emma's idea. She'd seen pictures of my garden on Andrew Whitmore's phone and had asked, "Can we go to Queen Grandma's house?" That's what they called me now. Queen Grandma. It had started as a nickname after Emma read a children's book about powerful women who tended magical gardens full of talking animals and enchanted seeds. She told her kindergarten teacher, "My grandma's like that. She writes books and grows things and makes people feel better." I laughed when Andrew Whitmore told me, but later, lying in bed and thinking about it, I cried because it hit me. Legacy isn't just in the stories we leave behind. Sometimes it's in the way someone small says your name when they think of comfort, of strength, of home. And slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice it happening, we had become a family again. Not the same one, not the old blueprint taped back together, but something new, something earned. Melissa Whitmore had changed too. There was a softness to her now, a gentler presence. She no longer moved through rooms like she was editing the space. She brought gardening magazines, homemade granola bars, and a folded note that said, "Thank you for giving Emma her roots." That weekend, we cooked together. Nothing fancy, grilled vegetables, peach cobbler, lemonade with too much sugar. We ate under the string lights Matthew had helped me hang the last time he visited. Rachel Whitmore had sent a handmade wooden sign from her new home in Vermont, "Ruth's Garden of Second Chances." I placed it gently into the rosemary pot. We laughed, we told stories, we passed around plates, and didn't talk about the past like a wound, but like a scar we'd chosen to stop hiding. After dinner one night, Andrew Whitmore pulled out a small wooden box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice low, his hands careful. Inside were several of George Whitmore's journals, restored, retyped, printed on soft paper, and bound like something sacred. "I read every page," Andrew Whitmore said. "He talked about you all the time, Mom. He called you his compass." I couldn't speak. I just touched the spine of one of the books and nodded. Words didn't feel strong enough for that moment. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep with one of my knitted shawls wrapped around her like a cocoon, Andrew Whitmore and I sat in the garden with mugs of mint tea. The sky was dark and alive with stars. The air smelled like basil and soil and something else, something unnameable, like old hope rising again. "I don't think I ever thanked you," he said, not looking at me, "for staying, for fighting, for leaving when you had to." I took a sip of tea. "You don't have to thank me," I said softly. "Just don't forget me again." He looked at me then, really looked. "Never," he whispered. The next morning, Emma handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, crayon on printer paper, slightly smudged at the edges. Me, sitting in the garden, wearing a crown made of vines and flowers. I had a speech bubble over my head that said, "You can always grow again." I taped it above my writing desk that afternoon, right beside my latest outline. That same week, Carmen called. "I've got an idea," she said. "Let's make it official. A community storytelling program. Led by you?" I blinked. "Me? Call it Roots That Remember. You've got the stories. You've got the voice. And honey, you've got the garden." I said yes. Within a month, we launched our first session. We met every Thursday morning behind the Literary Center, where folding chairs circled a patch of dry ground we'd slowly begun to reclaim. Each woman was given a flower pot and a single seed. After every story shared, we planted something new. Some brought journal entries, others brought poems. One woman read a letter she'd written to her daughter, who hadn't spoken to her in 17 years. We cried. We laughed in the wrong places. We hugged, we lingered, and the garden began to bloom. Lavender, basil, petunias, forget-me-nots, but also grief and joy, and the stubborn kind of hope that grows in the hardest places. I shared from my memoir in progress, the garage key and the garden gate. It ended with this: they gave me the garage, I chose the garden. One tries to store what no longer matters, the other dares to bloom again. The group clapped. Then they stayed late, drinking coffee and digging into the earth with their bare hands, as if they were rewriting something inside themselves. Emma came to one of the sessions. She sat in my lap the entire time, her head resting against my chest. At the end, she raised her hand and said, "Can I tell a story too?" We said yes. She told us about a dream where flowers talked, and the queen of the garden helped people find their way back home. Everyone cried, especially me. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Roots don't always grow down. Sometimes they grow toward each other, toward light, toward forgiveness." From the voice of Margaret Whitmore. It began with one article. A local journalist named Andrea came to our storytelling circle at the Literary Center. She was in her early 40s, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed, the kind of person who doesn't just observe, she absorbs. She sat through 3 full sessions, recording stories and jotting notes in a leather-bound notebook. I had no idea what she planned to write. 2 weeks later, she published a piece in the Arizona Sun titled, "The Woman Who Chose the Garden: How Margaret Whitmore Redefined Growing Older." I didn't expect much. A kind gesture, I thought. A little column in the community section. But then, the phones started ringing. The center's inbox filled with messages from other states. Women writing from Minnesota, Georgia, Oregon, some as young as 60, others 95. They wanted to know, how do I start again? How did you find the courage? Can I come to the next session? And for the first time in my life, I had to face a truth I never imagined would apply to me. I had become a voice for others. I wasn't just a mother or a widow or a gardener anymore. I was a mirror, reflecting a quiet truth so many had buried. That we never stop needing purpose. That aging is not a retreat, it's a revelation. The center helped me set up a virtual workshop series. We called it The Garden Table. Once a month, women from across the country gathered on video, each holding something green, something alive, even if it was just a houseplant on a windowsill. We shared stories. We cried over estranged children, unspoken regrets, second chances. One woman in Kansas said, "I haven't used my voice in 30 years, but tonight I think I found it again." I smiled and replied, "Then let's use it before it forgets how." Meanwhile, the small garden behind the Literary Center had taken on a life of its own. People donated seeds, tools, benches. We planted wildflowers everywhere, sun-loving, heat-daring, resilient things, the kind that don't ask permission to bloom. Carmen and I decided to name the space the Wildflower Court. And one bright Thursday afternoon, during a community planting event, something happened that shook me in the best way. A mother came up to me, holding her daughter's hand. "This is Mabel," she said. "She's 10, and she asked to meet you." The girl looked up at me, shyly. "Are you the lady who made a garden out of being sad?" I blinked. That was it, wasn't it? I knelt beside her and said, "Yes, I suppose I am." She smiled and said, "That's what I want to do when I grow up, make good things out of hard things." I hugged her, and afterward, I sat on the bench beneath the new trellis and let that moment settle into my bones. That night, my daughter Rachel Whitmore called. "I think you're going viral," she said, laughing. "Viral? Your article's been picked up by a national magazine. They want to do a feature. I think you're going to be on television." Television. Me. For years, I couldn't get my own children to call. Now people wanted to hear what I had to say from every corner of the country. The irony didn't escape me. But I didn't feel pride. Not in the way I used to chase it. What I felt was rightness, a click, a fullness, like every painful goodbye, every misunderstood act of love, every key left on a kitchen table had led me exactly here. The day of the interview, I wore my simplest dress, a soft blue, no jewelry, no flash, just me and my voice. The reporter asked questions about my children, the garage, the garden, the book I was working on. Then she asked, "What would you say to someone watching this who feels like they've been erased?" I paused, looked into the camera and said, "I'd tell them this. You are not a chapter someone else gets to skip. You are the author. If they put you in the garage, plant a garden in front of it. If they silence you, write louder. You don't need to be invited to matter. Just matter." The segment aired that weekend, and that's when the letters poured in. Not emails. Letters, handwritten, dozens, then hundreds. I kept them in a shoebox beneath my bed. One was from a 78-year-old woman named Harriet who wrote, "I sold my house to my son too. He told me I'd be more comfortable in the condo. Then he stopped visiting, but after hearing you speak, I unpacked my art supplies. I hadn't painted in 40 years. My fingers remembered. Thank you for reminding me I'm still here." Another, from a man in his 80s. "My wife passed 3 years ago. I haven't spoken much since, but your story made me pick up my harmonica again. Music came out. I cried. It felt good. And then came the letter that undid me completely. It was from a young woman in her 20s. My mom's in her 60s. I think I've been pushing her away without knowing it. Thank you for showing me what love actually looks like when it's seen too late. I'm going to call her right now." I held that letter to my chest and wept, because in all the years I gave my life to others, I never imagined that choosing myself might be the thing that helped them too. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying not to disappear. From the voice of Margaret Whitmore, 74. I used to think of that number as an ending, the soft hush before the curtain falls, the age when people speak of you in past tense, even when you're sitting right there. But this year, 74 felt more like standing on the edge of something vast and bright, arms open to whatever comes next. They threw me a party at the literary center. I told Carmen I didn't want anything big. She laughed and ignored me as usual. There were wildflowers everywhere, hundreds. The local nursery donated them. Women from the writing group lined the entryway with little clay pots painted in shades of sky and desert. Each one had a quote from someone in our circle, words that might have never been spoken if we hadn't made space for them. The front banner read, 74 and Rising, honoring Margaret Whitmore's legacy of voice. Legacy. There's a word I used to think belonged to men, or authors with bestsellers, or politicians with buildings named after them. Now I know. Legacy belongs to anyone who refuses to disappear. I walked into that room wearing the simplest dress I owned. No need to impress anyone. They already saw me. Andrew Whitmore stood near the punch bowl, holding Emma in his arms. Melissa Whitmore waved from a table, seated next to Rachel Whitmore and Matthew. My children. Not perfect, but present. Emma wore a paper crown with Garden Queen written across the front. She spotted me and shouted, "Grandma's here," like I was royalty walking into a palace, and in that moment, I believed her. They gave me the floor to speak. I stood at the little wooden podium, palms resting on its edge, eyes scanning the room filled with people I once never imagined would care what I had to say. I cleared my throat. "I used to believe my story ended the day my son left a garage key on my kitchen table," I began. "I thought that was the world's way of saying, 'You've served your purpose. Step aside.'" A murmur rolled through the room. But it turns out that key wasn't a door closing. It was a hinge waiting for movement. I paused, then smiled. I didn't move into the garage. I moved into myself. People clapped. I found a town. I found my voice. I found a little garden in the desert and turned it into a home, not just for me, but for every woman who thought she had run out of pages. I looked at Emma, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of me. And now, my granddaughter grows wildflowers in clay pots and tells stories to her stuffed animals about brave old women who don't give up. The room rose in applause. After the speeches and hugs, Andrew Whitmore approached me with a box. Inside, nestled on blue velvet, was the garage key. But now it was dipped in silver. Engraved on one side were the words, "Thank you for using this to open the world." I wept, and I let him hold me. He whispered, "You changed everything, Mom." Not just for us, for thousands. Later that night, After the guests left and the center had gone quiet, I sat in my garden beneath the stars. The wind was soft. The flowers still held heat from the day. The paper crown Emma had worn sat beside me on the bench. I opened my notebook and wrote the final lines of my memoir. They offered me a room to disappear in. I chose to bloom instead. I am not the end of something. I am the beginning of everything I was never told I could be. And if you're reading this, I want you to know it's never too late to write a different ending. Then I closed the notebook and I looked up at the sky. 74 stars for 74 years, still rising, always rising. If Margaret Whitmore's story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your mother, your grandmother, or maybe even yourself, then don't let it end here. This isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. Too many women are quietly erased after a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Too many are handed garage keys instead of dignity. That ends with us. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, have you ever seen someone discarded like Ruth? Do you know a woman who deserves to be heard again? Or are you finally ready to bloom after being silenced? Click the like button to honor Ruth and every woman who has ever had to rebuild her life from the margins. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real-life stories that expose the silence, challenge the norms, and celebrate those who refuse to vanish quietly. Because here, every voice matters, and your story isn't over, it's just beginning.